Welcome to the Multifamily Housing Program, July 2021 Notice of Funding Availability Workshops. My name is Hector Leyva, and I am one of two program managers for MHP, along with my peer, Lynn Jones. While many of you have had attended workshops in the past, or perhaps another HCD programs workshop, or for those of you who are new, there's a lot of information that will be provided. Our goal is to assist you in providing the information you may need to help making your application submission successful. If you have a question at any time during this presentation, we advise you to send that to the MHP inbox at mhp@hcd.ca.gov. Make sure to use any NOFA, guideline, or UMR citations when asking questions as best you can. That will allow us to know what area you need clarification on. Let's go ahead and look at today's agenda. The MHP Round 4 NOFA has had several updates and additions from previous rounds. Today, we have members of our staff who will cover multiple topics with you and will expand on and provide details for all the sections shown here. I will be going over the NOFA Round 3 recap, along with what's new in Round 4, what's continuing from Round 3, and the AB 434 Super NOFA. Michael Murphy will go over the program overview. Grace Edpolina will go over application review and threshold. Kenneth will go over rating and ranking, going forward known as scoring. Sherlane Hunt will go over feasibility. And Simon Tabellero will go over MHP application highlights, application submittal, and MHP resources. Let's start off with a recap of our last round, known as Round 3. The Round 3 NOFA was released on July 15, 2020, and had approximately $175 million in funds available. It was amended shortly after on August 21st, adding an additional $20 million for the excess sites set aside. An additional funds of just under $10.7 million that were disencumbered from previous awards increased the total actual available to just over $205.6 million. The department met the mandated set-aside for senior projects, as well as the geographic distributions for rural, northern, and southern projects. The due date for applications was September 15, 2020, with awards announced January 22, 2021. For all those who applied in this or any of the previous rounds, or you plan on applying in the upcoming round, the following slides and information will show you just how competitive MHP has been and continues to be. For almost all projects, a perfect score with an incredibly competitive tiebreaker was needed in order to be awarded. The bonus point was also obtained by many of the awardees, which allowed the project to show it was in a position to move forward rather quickly if awarded. It is our expectation that our upcoming round will be just as competitive, perhaps even more so, considering that MHP will be a part of the AB 434 Super NOFA that will be released this upcoming February 2022. I will provide additional information on that later on in the presentation. On the application due date of September 15th, the department received 92 total applications. 13 of those applications were immediately rejected due to being incomplete or for having a self-score below the minimum 90 points required for threshold. We were just shy of $1 billion in requests, coming in at $986,048,382. With just under $206 million available, we were oversubscribed by almost $792 million. During the threshold phase, staff reviewed a total of 79 applications. We saw a 15.2% fail rate from threshold, with projects failing from ineligible sponsor, incomplete application, and of course, site control. Of those 79 applications, 67 moved forward to scoring. During our final phase of review, feasibility, 20 applications moved forward. This allowed us to meet our senior set-aside and geographic distributions and have some cushion in the event any of the recommended projects were not approved by our internal loan committee. Once feasibility reviews were completed, 17 projects were recommended by our staff and received awards totaling $205,676,058. The current slide shows a breakdown of all awarded projects and funding. We had one excess site project awarded funds, and as previously stated, MHP was able to meet the mandated statutory set-aside for our 3 senior projects, accounting for 23% of the funds available. In meeting our geographic distributions, 21% of the funds went to 5 rural projects, 32% of the funds went to 6 projects in the north, and just under 46% of the funds went to 6 projects in the south. I cannot stress enough how competitive MHP is. The breakdown on the slide shows the minimum score needed, along with the maximum tiebreaker needed for round 3 awarded projects. We have also added how many projects earned the bonus point. Rural projects had a minimum score of 110. Projects known and qualified as senior had to have a score of 116, a perfect score, along with projects in the north and the south, which also had perfect scores of 116. Tiebreaker scores were a factor in determining which projects moved forward and were awarded. Lastly, 13 of the 17 awarded projects received the bonus point. That would be the 6 projects in the south, 6 projects in the north, and 1 rural project. The slide you are seeing now represents the awarded projects and the impact they will have on housing. The results, you as awardees, along with the department, will build and develop to the benefit of thousands of Californians across the state. So let's look at a breakdown of the projects. 17 of the awarded projects, so all of them for round 3, were new construction. 12 of the projects are located in urban areas and are spread out over 13 cities and 11 counties. Of the 5 MHP project types, 17 qualified as large family, 8 were special needs, 6 were supportive housing, and there were 3 senior projects. The impact statewide of these 17 projects is broken down as follows. 178 units are targeting chronically homeless populations, or known as supportive housing units. 224 are targeting our special needs populations. 785 will be MHP assisted, meaning they will be regulated in our regulatory agreement to AMI standards and or targeted populations. An additional 449 other restricted units will be restricted by another public agency or department source for units as defined as 60% AMI and lower. These 17 projects with the MHP funds will have 1,251 total units created. All 17 awarded projects anticipate construction commencement within 12 to 18 months of award. This now concludes the recap of round 3. The next slide will show you the impact MHP, and again, all of your awarded projects, has and will continue to have as they get built. This slide shows the cumulative totals for all awarded projects in rounds 1 through 3. We cannot understate the impact these funds, these awards, and these projects will have on Californians. Let's start again with a breakdown of the type of projects that were awarded. Over rounds 1 through 3, 65 total projects have been awarded. 62 of those are new construction, with an additional 3 known as and qualifying as rehabilitation. Projects are located in 24 different cities and 13 counties and can be further identified as follows. 52 of the projects will be located in urban areas, with the remaining 13 projects located in rural areas and or counties, 25 in northern counties, and 27 located in southern counties. For those brand new to MHP, a rural designation is determined by TCAC. Southern projects are identified as starting with Kern, San Bernardino, and San Luis Obispo counties in south. Everything north of these 3 counties is considered north. Of the 5 MHP project types, 14 have qualified as large family projects, 24 are special needs, 25 are supportive housing, and 11 qualified as senior projects. We did not have any submitted and or awarded as an at-risk of conversion project type. The statewide impact of these 65 projects. 680 units will be targeted and restricted to supportive housing. 695 will be special needs units. 2,559 will be MHP assisted and restricted in our regulatory agreement, with an additional 2,052 other restricted units restricted by another public agency or department source. Once these 65 projects are completed, they will have produced 4,892 total units. Let me repeat that. These 65 projects will end up producing 4,892 total units to support and house Californians across the state. Kudos to all of you. The last bit of information related to these 65 awarded projects. 4 of them have withdrawn as they have obtained other sources of funding. 32 have had a standard agreement executed, with an additional 21 currently routing internally. That leaves us with 8 that have not submitted their organizational documents. To those who have provided all of your documents, thank you. For those who have not, we are using this opportunity to strongly implore you to submit your remaining documents. As we enter this upcoming round, followed immediately by the NOFA, there will be minimal capacity from our reps to review, produce, and route your projects and have your standard agreement executed. If you have a closing date that is in the distant future, that's okay. MHP and the department as a whole have a goal to get your standard agreement executed as soon, as quickly, and as efficiently as possible. We want to execute your standard agreement and get it over to our loan closing partners, who will assist you with the construction and updates to your project. Next on the agenda, let's go over what is new in this round. For reference, all the information being covered is located in the July 2021 NOFA Section 1. Going forward, it will be referred to as Round 4. Please note, as I provide you information in the next few sections, you might hear the information repeated later on, as it will be covered in more detail in upcoming sections of this workshop. Let's start out with what has been our 2 biggest requests from previous rounds, and with that, the first announcement. The stacking of department funds on the same units has been repealed. An administrative memo has been released by the department, authorized by our Deputy Director, Jennifer Seeger. This is effective for NOFAs that have been released July 1st and on. MHP will be the first to implement this change, so let's go over what this actually means for all of you. Number 1, you can receive multiple department funds on the same units. This is, of course, subject to each program's requirements, in addition to any integration and/or Article 34 qualifications. Number 2, if you have been awarded department funds previously and have submitted an application to another program, there can be no change to the unit mix from the original award. If there is, your subsequent application will be withdrawn. Let me repeat that and give you an example. If you were awarded CERNA funds in the past year and applied to MHP for this round, there could not be a change in the unit mix, either AMI or targeted populations. Number 3, you are limited to a max of 2 department loans with an additional 2 department grants such as IIG, TOD, and HRI in the AHSC program. Grants such as PAWS, TRA, STI, or program would not be eligible. The second announcement, Guideline Section 7302D, the 9% tax credit prohibition, has been repealed. Effective this round, we will now be accepting both 4% and 9% tax credit projects. Additionally, 9% loan limits are listed in the Round 4 NOFA, Section 4E4, and will be provided in detail during our program overview. Now let me answer the question I believe many of you are wanting to ask. If you have been previously awarded MHP funds as a 4% project, can you switch over to a 9% project? The answer to that is no. You would need to relinquish your previous award and submit a new application for this round with no guarantee of obtaining an award. The next item that's new in this NOFA is related to tribal entities. Section 4B1 in the Round 4 NOFA has amended and updated who is an eligible sponsor for the upcoming round to include tribal entities. Tribal entities must meet the following requirements in addition to all threshold scoring and feasibility requirements. Number 1, they must be located in Indian country as defined by 18 U.S.C. 1151, or for those not located on tribal land, fee title would be required. Number 2, They must be a federally recognized tribe per the Bureau of Indian Affairs as of the application due date. Tribes not recognized federally, but that are recognized by the state, do not qualify under this definition. Number 3, all tribal entities, projects must meet site control requirements. Number 4, for those on tribal land, sponsor must demonstrate that they will be able to record department documents with the Records Office of the Bureau of Indian Affairs or in the appropriate official records office of the county in which the project is located. And last, number 5, tribal entities must submit all sponsor documentation, which can include a constitution, a charter, resolution, and all other applicable organizational documents as listed in the MHP Round 4 application. To create a more equitable distribution of MHP funds, a set-aside has been created. The top-ranked tribal entity, meeting threshold, scoring, and feasibility requirements, will be awarded. All other eligible tribal projects meeting program requirements will be ranked with all other applicants. Continuing with what's new in this NOFA. In an effort to reduce demand for SIDLAC allocations while encouraging efficient and timely development of affordable housing, MHP will reserve up to 20% of funds available under the Round 4 NOFA as supplemental funding. This is intended to encourage submission of qualified non-tax credit project applications by offering enhanced loan limits, but does not create a set-aside or give these projects an unreasonable competitive advantage. For those choosing to submit an application for this supplemental funding, the previous MHP award must be relinquished with no guarantee of obtaining a new award. Applicants must submit as a tax credit, supplemental non-tax credit, or can submit as both. Applicants who choose to compete as both tax credit and supplemental non-tax credit must submit 2 separate MHP applications. All supplemental tax applications will be scored and ranked in accordance with Section 7320B. Only the highest scoring supplemental non-tax credit application will receive awards up to the 20% allowed, which is approximately $40 million. Supplemental non-tax credit applications will be subject to the following terms and conditions. Sponsors must be a nonprofit or tribal entity. All department funding, with the exception of MHP, must be committed prior to the final rating and ranking for the MHP program. Construction must begin within 12 months after the date of the award letter. Failure to meet this condition will result in the forfeiture of the MHP award. Qualified projects will receive maximum leverage points under Section 7320B4, which is 20 points. In the event of a tie, after projects have been scored and tiebreaker determined, the project having the lowest percentage of department funding shall receive an award of funds. But take note, the total department funding, including MHP, cannot exceed 75% of your total development cost. The MHP per unit loan limit calculated will be waived to include the necessary funds needed to replace the tax credit equity, but not to exceed the Round 4 NOFA limit of $20 million. Loan limits for non-tax credit projects are the same as 4% tax credit projects shown in Guidelines Section 7307B2. The development cost per unit is not to exceed $550,000. If costs per unit exceed this amount, they would not meet program feasibility requirements. Total developer fees shall not exceed $2,200,000. In addition, the developer fee paid from development funding sources, known as priority, shall not exceed the per unit limit calculated in accordance with UMR 8312A and with Guideline Section 7305B has been amended to allow for non-tax credit projects. Now, let's go on to non-tax credit applications not seeking supplemental funding and what they will be subject to is following terms and conditions. Sponsor can be a for-profit. The MHP loan limit shall not exceed the funding gap and does not have the exception that supplemental non-tax credit projects can receive. Loan limits for non-tax credit projects are the same as 4% tax credit projects shown in guidelines section 7307B2. All applications will be scored and ranked in accordance with section 7320B. Qualified projects will receive maximum leverage points under section 7320B4, which is 20 points. The development cost per unit is subject to all program feasibility requirements, including those in UMR 8311. Total developer fee shall not exceed $2,200,000. The developer fee paid from development funding sources shall not exceed the per unit limit calculated in accordance with UMR 8312A. Last, guideline section 7305B has been amended to allow for non-tax credit projects. We do encourage you to submit a letter of explanation advising us if you are submitting as a supplemental non-tax credit project or a non-tax credit project not seeking supplemental funding. To further assist in clarifying our integration requirements in 7302G, special needs populations have been defined in the July 2021 MHP Notice of Changes, also known as Appendix A of the Round 4 NOFA. These targeted populations are subject to integration requirements. Please note, projects targeting farm workers and/or agricultural workers are not subject to integration requirements, in addition to no longer having to provide a supportive service plan. This concludes the what's new for this upcoming round. Next on the agenda, let's go over what is continuing in this round that were introduced in our last round, round 3. For reference, all the information being covered next is located in the round 4 NOFA, section 2. The past 18 months have been difficult for all of us due to COVID. It has exacerbated our housing problems, caused an increase in our homeless populations, and increased the need for affordable housing across the state. Luckily for you, HCD has stayed busy and open, continuing to release NOFAs across multiple programs. In addition to MHP, other programs such as CERNA, AHSC, CalHome, IIG, as well as highly visible programs like HomeKey and RoomKey have all had funding rounds. While we are very proud and excited with the amount of money that has been released, the department had numerous projects which had submitted applications to separate programs without notification to the other funding programs. This led to an extra coordinated effort across programs to ensure that there was no subsidy stacking and, more important, duplicative work. The end result: if you submit an application for one program without disclosing or including all HCD sources, you will not be awarded funds in all programs. The first application received and successfully meeting the program requirements will be awarded, with all other applications submitted being withdrawn. Projects had applied for MHP after being awarded other department funds for the same units to find out if one funding source would be better than the other. In applying for multiple department funding sources, applicants choosing to replace or swap one funding source with MHP funding ties up program funds and causes delays in housing unit production. This is also an inefficient use of already limited public resources. So, to avoid a delay in the deployment of funding, HCD will now require forfeiture of a prior award in writing prior to the application due date, with no assurance of receiving a new award. This prohibition applies to funds awarded under any department program, including a prior MHP award. Now, if you submit an application to multiple programs and you list all the sources you applied to, you would be eligible to receive all awards subject to meeting the requirements for each program. Our scoring update from round 3, updating guideline section 7320 B2A, addressing your most serious local housing needs, continues to be revised, and the revision is located in round 4 NOFA section 2E. Large family new construction projects can be awarded 5 points by meeting criteria that will be detailed later in the scoring section of our workshop. A bonus point will continue to be awarded to all applicants that submit their complete borrower organizational documents. The purpose was, and still is, to allow for the efficient and timely production of standard agreements, with the goal of producing the essay shortly after award announcement. Additional detail and requirements will be detailed in the scoring section of our workshop. And for the greatest transparency, we detailed specifically on the application checklist the list of documents required for each of the borrowing entities as they apply to your borrower structure. Since COVID, the way we do business has seen constant change and rapid adaptation. The department is accepting documents that utilize electronic signatures, including on platforms such as DocuSign and/or scanned copies. Wet signatures are no longer required. As many of you are aware, 4% and 9% tax-exempt bond financing is incredibly competitive. What does this mean for you? We are now requiring an EFC or term sheet for the 4% bond financing to be included with your application. This financing will no longer be considered committed. To clarify though, we are requiring the commitment letter for the bond letter, not the SIDLEC allocation commitment. These EFCs or commitment letters will be required for construction and permanent financing and would need to be submitted at the time of application in order to potentially be awarded points in the project readiness scoring category 7320B5. Please review the guidelines to ensure you meet all the requirements for the scoring category. Additional detail will be provided later on in the scoring portion of the workshop. We've also had to provide additional clarifications on joint ventures. Sponsors forming a joint venture in accordance with guideline section 7303A must also meet the requirements of 7303D. The borrower limited partnership or a network of entities affiliated with a common parent entity does not meet the definition in 7303D. A fully formed joint entity filed with the state of California with supporting organizational documentation would need to be submitted to support this entity type. Sponsor capacity is significant as additional programs not limited to MHP make awards. As sponsors are awarded, they need to continue to demonstrate that they have the capacity to meet the requirements of existing awards, in addition to having capacity to handle additional awards. Certification and a staffing chart working on the proposed project would need to be submitted at the time of application. Capacity cannot be claimed using that of a parent company. Guideline section 7303C allows for the experience of an individual to be utilized to meet the requirements of a sponsor experience. If the sponsor is relying on the experience of an individual, documentation as identified and required in the MHP Round 4 application must be submitted and deemed acceptable. That concludes the overview of the Round 3 updates continuing in Round 4. And now, the final area I will cover. AB 434, going forward, will be known as the Super NOFA, in addition to the draft MHP guidelines. The legislature passed and the governor signed into law Assembly Bill 434 on September 28, 2020. What this legislation did is essentially this. It authorized HCD to update numerous multifamily programs administered by the department, releasing a Super NOFA with available funds in the programs I am about to list. This was meant to increase efficiency, create a more structured schedule, and allow developers to truly tailor their proposed projects on the actual funds needed. The Super NOFA is envisioned as envisioned, will allow applicants to have a one-stop shop for funding. In addition to MHP, the programs impacted are the Veterans Housing and Homelessness Program, VHIP, the Joe Cerna Jr. Farm Workers Housing Grant Program, CERNA, the Transit-Oriented Development Program, TOD, the Infill Infrastructure Grant Program, IIG, and the Housing for a Healthy California Program, HHC. There will be one application submitted for all sources of funding for the programs listed. Gone are the days of completing multiple applications at different times for the same project. MHP has been at the forefront of application development, going from a separate universal application and supplemental application to now just having one MHP application. We have reduced the duplicative data points, reduced the amount of information needed, which has resulted in a much more streamlined application. We have received feedback from our external partners and our internal staff who review the applications, both applauding the improvements. AB 434 looks to continue that and is currently developing what we anticipate will be the best product yet. The current scheduled release for the Super NOFA is February 2022, and awards announced in 1 year, August of 2022. Let me emphasize it this way. The Super NOFA will be released in less than 6 months. The department is actively working on creating the tools and processes for this endeavor, but most importantly is aligning all the programs impacted. So the big question is, what do we mean by aligning all impacted programs? Number one, the first thing the department is tackling is updating all program guidelines to conform with the MHP guidelines. MHP is the base of AB 434. The other programs will be updating their guidelines to better align with the threshold and scoring requirements of MHP. Now there will be some one-offs. For example, TOD and IIG have transit requirements, or VIP is specific to veterans. But the feedback we have heard is that when applying for multiple sources of HCD funds, it is difficult to meet the requirements of each program as they are so different in their requirements. I'd also like to add that the department has taken this opportunity with the draft MHP guidelines, as they are broadly applicable to all AB 430 programs per statute, and utilizing feedback from stakeholders and staff from our other multifamily programs, incorporating the best thinking from our suite of multifamily funding programs. Number two, the second objective is to better align with TCAC and CIDLAC regulations. There are discrepancies in HCD requirements and those of TCAC and CIDLAC. We are looking at those now, hoping to better align ourselves with them, which will hopefully make the projects that much more successful in obtaining their tax credits. Number three, one of the biggest hurdles many of our external partners have had, not to mention the difficulties our teams have had internally in reviewing the application, is the different languages, the definitions each program uses. We have working groups actively reviewing these differences with the goal of having one universal list of common definitions. An example of this would be sponsor, applicant, and developer. They all mean the same thing, but are used differently based on program. AB 434 will fix that. Number four, the threshold requirements, along with the scoring criteria, will all be based on MHP. Later on in this presentation, we will be going over the current threshold scoring and feasibility requirements. I say current as this round will be subject to the June 2019 MHP guidelines. But future state, for the Super NOFA, the 2022 MHP guidelines will be the base. Those draft guidelines are currently posted on the MHP webpage. We have just finished our stakeholder sessions and comment period. We anticipate the final guidelines being posted no later than November 2021. All the other programs impacted and mentioned are currently in the process of updating their guidelines to align with MHP and are mirroring those changes proposed in the MHP draft guidelines. If you would like to participate in the stakeholder sessions or guideline feedback, ensure you are signed up for the listserv announcements. HCD anticipates all other impacted guidelines to be posted for public comment in September, with final guidelines posted in November 2021. Additionally, you can email questions to supernofa@hcd.ca.gov. And with that, that concludes my portion of the presentation. Michael Murphy will now present our program overview.
Thank you, Hector. I'm Michael Murphy, and I'll be covering the program overview for the presentation today. Quick note, if you were following along in the NOFA guidelines and/or the application, representatives will be making every effort to cover items in the order in which they appear in this presentation. To start off, the authority for our July Round 4 NOFA is given by Senate Bill 3, which authorized the Veterans and Affordable Housing Bond Act of 2018 and was adopted by voters on November 6, 2018 as Proposition 1. Round 4 has approximately $220 million to award, and of that $220 million, up to $20 million of available funds will be set aside for an excess site project or projects selected per Executive Order N0619, and up to 20% allocated to non-tax credit projects. The maximum loan amount is $20 million. MHP set-asides include an 18.3% for senior housing and one new set-aside for an eligible tribal entity. Please see the Round 4 NOFA, Section 4A3. Regarding that tribal entity, the top-ranked application submitted by an eligible tribal entity, which meets all threshold, scoring, and feasibility requirements, will receive an award. We have the following geographical distributions: 20% rural, 30% going to Northern California, and 45% going to Southern California. Here's a snapshot of the NOFA timeline. The NOFA is dated July 23rd, 2021. Applications will be due 60 days following the NOFA date, which is Monday, September 20th, 2021 at 5:00 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. We will present recommendations for awards to the Internal Loan Committee with award announcements following in December of 2021. MHP offers awardees a loan. MHP loans will be a 55-year term with 3% simple interest, and this will include a mandatory debt service of 0.42%, with unpaid interest and principal due at the end of the term. Now, non-tax credit projects and projects utilizing 4% tax credits, the base loan limits are $175,000 per unit for supportive housing restricted units and a large family new construction restricted units located in a high resource or highest resource area according to the TCAC HCD Opportunity Area Map at the time of application. All other restricted units are at $150,000 per unit, and this includes the manager's unit unless otherwise specifically restricted. The 9% base loan limits are $110,000 per supportive housing unit, $110,000 per restricted unit in a large family new construction project located in a high resource or highest resource area according to the TCAC HCD Opportunity Area Map at the time of application, and $95,000 per other restricted unit. The loan amounts are set according by county and AMI levels and can be found on the HCD website. There is also a link within the application on the max loan and Unimix chart. Now we need to clarify between authorizations and resolutions. The sponsor authorizing resolution is where the governing board for the sponsor and co-sponsor, if applicable, gives authorization for the entity to apply for MHP funding. This is a threshold requirement and must be submitted at the time of application. The OD1, OD2, and OD3 are required post-award and from awardees only. This provides approval to borrow those funds and identifies all entity relationships. Now, relocation law provides important protections and assistance to displaced persons and entities affected by the acquisition, rehabilitation, or demolition of real property for government-funded projects. If your project is not subject to the state relocation assistance law, you must provide a detailed narrative on the project overview tab. Just stating not applicable or vacant land will not be sufficient. Please provide a detailed answer. If your project is subject to the state relocation assistance law, you must provide an initial relocation plan. Please see our guidelines, section 7315, for more details. The relocation plan is subject to review and approval by the department prior to the disbursement of program funds. If the relocation plan that is submitted is equal to or greater than a year old, the department may ask for an update. Now, in previous rounds, there was some confusion surrounding Article 34, and the department would receive both an allocation letter and a legal opinion letter. You only need to submit one document depending on which applies to your project. The two possibilities for the project are: one, the project has Article 34 authority, where an allocation letter is required, or two, the project is claiming an exemption of Article 34 and a legal opinion letter is required. This slide illustrates a project with Article 34 authority where an allocation letter is required by an official, and it must include the key items listed above. This slide illustrates when the project is claiming an exemption from Article 34 and a legal opinion letter is required. It must contain the necessary information, including but not limited to all public funding sources, the number of low-income units, and the exemption must be supported by facts and by the Constitution, statute, or case law. Now, to reemphasize, you only need to provide an allocation letter or legal opinion letter, depending on which applies to your project. This concludes the program overview, and I would now like to introduce you to Grace Edpolina, who will be going over application review.
Thank you, Michael. My name is Grace, and I will be discussing the application review process. The application must have a minimum self-score of 90 points and must be submitted electronically using the Financial Assistance Application Submittal Tool System, FAST, no later than 5 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time on Monday, September 20, 2021. Original wet signature documents are no longer required since the entire application will be submitted electronically. Later in this presentation, Simon will go into further detail regarding the submittal process. It is important to note that during the threshold and scoring application review phases, no new, additional, or revised documentation will be considered. Based upon the total number of applications scored, ranked, and total available funds, the department may establish a point score cutoff after each phase of the review process. If an application will not be within the fundable range as indicated in its initial point score, additional review by the department is not required. The application review process consists of 3 phases. The first phase is threshold. The department will review the application to ensure it meets the minimum threshold requirements set forth in Round 4 NOFA and 2019 MHP guidelines. The second phase is scoring. In this phase, applications will be reviewed based on the scoring criteria set forth in Round 4 NOFA and 2019 MHP guidelines. The highest ranking applications will then move on to the third and final phase, feasibility. The project will be reviewed for compliance with program requirements to determine if the project is financially feasible. You will receive a determination letter for both threshold and scoring reviews. If the application has been determined to be ineligible and you wish to appeal, it must be in writing and submitted by the deadline specified in the letter. The basis of the appeal must be on the decision made by the department in these NOFA only and does not apply to past or future NOFAs. Once a decision is made, it shall constitute the final action of the department. Please refer to the appeals process in the Round 4 NOFA. Now let's move on to discuss in detail the first phase of the application review threshold. All section references are subject to the 2017 UMRs, the 2019 MHP guidelines, and Round 4 NOFA. This is a snapshot of the document checklist. List of all minimum threshold requirements for all projects is found at the leftmost column marked with an X. Additional threshold requirements may apply depending on your project type. The initial threshold review consists of eligible project, eligible sponsor, site control, initial supportive services plan for special needs and supportive housing populations, and submitting a complete application. First requirement, eligible project. An eligible project must be one of the following: new construction, rehab with or without acquisition, or conversion of a non-residential structure to a rental housing development containing 5 or more units. At the time of application, construction work shall not have commenced except for emergency repairs to existing structures required to eliminate hazards or threats to health and safety. As a reminder, projects may qualify as one or more project type. However, they must meet all requirements of at least one project type. There are 5 distinct project types: large family, senior, at high risk, supportive housing, and special needs. For a large family, at least 25% of restricted units have 3 or more bedrooms, and the minimum of an additional 25% of restricted units have 2 or more bedrooms. Senior projects, eligible only if all units are restricted to residents who are 62 years of age or older. For exceptions to age restrictions, please refer to MHP Guidelines Section 7302E3. At high risk involves a project that is currently an affordable housing project at risk of converting to market rate. Supportive housing consists of a project where at least 15% of restricted units and not less than 10 units are set aside for individuals experiencing chronic homelessness and meets all the requirements set forth in Guidelines Section 7302F, one of which is to fill vacancies with referrals from Local Coordinated Entry System, or CES. Special Needs Project requires at least 25% of restricted units set aside for special needs population. Please refer to the 2019 MHP Guidelines, Section 7301Z, for populations that may qualify as special needs. Second requirement, eligible sponsor. An eligible sponsor shall meet the following. It shall be any entity which meets the requirements outlined in Section 7303A. As mentioned earlier by Hector, this section is amended in Round 4 NOFA to include tribal entity as an eligible sponsor. A sponsor formed as a joint venture shall comply with requirements of Section 7303D. Sponsors shall be organized as a for-profit, limited profit, or non-profit. The Entity or Docs tab in the application now includes federally recognized Indian tribe. Additional organizational document requirements may apply depending on the type of entity's organizational structure. To reiterate what Hector mentioned earlier, for supplemental non-tax credit projects, sponsor must be nonprofit or a tribal entity. For non-tax credit projects not seeking supplemental funding, a sponsor can be a for-profit. The sponsor must demonstrate experience relevant to owning and developing affordable rental housing through evidencing current capacity and complete the staffing chart in the application. As a reminder, tribal entities may contract with an experienced developer who will not be a general partner, provided that the contract is fully executed at time of application submission. Third requirement, site control. At the time of application, the sponsor must demonstrate site control of the proposed project property, either in the name of the sponsor or an entity controlled by the sponsor. If in the name of the entity controlled by the sponsor, the entity's organizational documents submitted with the application must clearly demonstrate sponsor control. As mentioned by Hector earlier, proposed projects for tribal entities must satisfy one of the following. Be located either in Indian country as defined by Section 1151 of Title 18 U.S. Code or located on fee land. Fee title for tribal trust land submitted may be evidenced by a title status report or an attorney's opinion regarding chain of title and current title status. If proposed project is outside tribal trust land, preliminary title report must be submitted. Continuing with site control, if the project is a scattered site, various sites must have a single owner, property manager, and common funding except for any non-residential condominium units. Please refer to UMRs for acceptable forms of site control. Note that the disposition and development agreement, or DDA, are specific to public entities. If you are submitting an exclusive negotiation agreement, or ENA, the ENA must be for negotiation of the site acquisition and must contain essential terms of the acquisition agreed to by both parties. All forms of site control must extend through the award date of December 2021. Fourth requirement, initial supportive services plan. For projects that include MHP-assisted supportive housing or special needs units, excluding agricultural workers as target population, an initial supportive services plan is required. The service plan shall be consistent with the program requirements. Services must be suitable to the needs of the targeted population, and answers to each section must be clearly defined and completed thoroughly. In round 4, you will notice updates to the service plan, which now incorporates the entire supportive housing and special needs target populations. Additionally, for projects that include MHP-assisted supportive housing or special needs units, project must demonstrate integration of the targeted disabled populations with the general public by physically integrating assisted units restricted to the targeted disabled persons with other units to the maximum extent feasible and subject to reasonable health and safety requirements consistent with the Code of Federal Regulations. In projects with more than 20 units, no more than 49% of total units restricted to occupancy by persons with disabilities assisted by department funding sources. Disabled populations as applicable to this subsection is defined in Appendix A of the Round 4 NOFA. Fifth requirement, submitting a complete application. As I mentioned earlier, completed application must be submitted through the FAST system along with all supporting documents as specified in the document checklist found in the application. Received application must be sufficient for the department to perform a thorough review and is complete pursuant to Guidelines Section 7318 and 7320A. Remember, during the threshold and scoring application review phases, no new, additional, or revised documentation will be considered. Thank you for listening, and I'd like to introduce Kenneth Turner, who will present the scoring section of the application review.
Thank you, Grace. My name is Kenneth Turner, and today I'll be discussing the second phase of application review, scoring. This scoring criteria chart is presented in the Round 4 NOFA and the June 2019 MHP guidelines. This chart breaks down the maximum points that can be obtained in each category, with a total maximum points of 116. The department shall rate and rank applications in accordance with Guidelines Section 7320B. I will be going over highlights in each of the 6 categories. The first scoring category is serving lowest income levels with a potential maximum points of 35. Points will be calculated based on the information filled from the max loan and unit mix table. The more units you have in a lower area median income, or AMI, the project will receive higher points. Remember, the deeper the affordability, the greater the points. If your project is designated as rural according to TCAC, the 55% column will open and autofill from the max loan worksheet. You must meet rural designation at the time of application and supply supporting documentation. The second scoring category is addressing most serious local housing need with a potential maximum points of 10. Points will be awarded for large family new construction projects located in a high resource or highest resource area at the time of application, or large family projects having at least 15% of the restricted units assisted by the department and occupied by special needs population as defined in 7301Z. 5 points will be awarded for qualifying as both a senior and special needs project. For projects proposing 10% of their restricted units set aside for homeless populations and are filled by referrals from the local coordinated entry system, or CES, may receive 5 points if answering yes to both parts. The third scoring category is development and ownership experience, with a potential maximum points of 20. The sponsor must demonstrate experience developing and owning affordable rental housing. If the sponsor relies upon the experience of its principal to meet the sponsor eligibility requirements, additional documentation is needed. Please refer to the document checklist. Completed projects must have a minimum of 10 units or a minimum of 5 units if the project has less than 15 units, and at least 70% of those are set aside as special needs population. Points are awarded as follows. There are 4 points for each project completed in years 1 through 5 preceding the application due date, and 2 points for each project completed in years 6 through 10 preceding the application due date. The alternative scoring method can be used for projects having at least 70% of the units reserved for special needs populations, or under the Round 4 NOFA Section 4G2, tribal entities are eligible as set forth in Guidelines Section 7320B3E. Negative points may be applicable. As stated in the application and shown on this slide, 5 points will be deducted for each occurrence, for a maximum deduction of 10 points in each of the 6 events. The maximum points that can be deducted from this category is 50. These events shall not result in the deduction of points if they have been fully resolved at the time of application due date. If you have any projects that have been awarded HCD funds, we recommend that you contact the Asset Management and Compliance Branch, AMC, as shown on this slide. The fourth scoring category is leverage of funds, with a potential maximum of 20 points. The total points earned in this section will round to the nearest tenth. We have provided notes in red to aid in understanding these calculations. The points earned for supportive housing units are showing for clarity. These points are rounded to 3 decimal places. Per Section 4F of the Round 4 NOFA, non-tax credit projects will receive the full 20 points for leverage of funds. The fifth scoring category I will be clarifying is project readiness, Section 7320B5. You can potentially earn a maximum of 15 points by meeting all criteria. Enforceable funding commitments, or EFCs, for all construction and permanent financing, excluding tax credits, must be submitted. As mentioned earlier by Hector, we are now requiring an EFC or term sheet for the 4% bond financing to be included with your application. This financing will no longer be considered committed. To clarify, we are requiring the commitment letter for the bond lender, not the CDLAC allocation commitment. If you have been awarded additional HCD department funds, please provide us with an award letter. If it has not been awarded by the conclusion of MHP scoring, then it is considered not committed and points will not be received. Please note the additional requirement for 7320B5D. If your project has operating subsidies, an EFC must be provided from the source and can be evidenced by a letter of intent or other documentation to include the amount, number of units, and terms of the commitment. When completing the local approvals and environmental review verification form, the local jurisdiction will identify if CEQA is not required, in public comment, or required and approved. Based on the response, additional documentation as listed in the document checklist must be submitted and deemed acceptable. NEPA can be triggered if any federal sources of funding are listed in the development sources and can include operating subsidies. Please note, project-based rental subsidies alone would not trigger NEPA. Additional documentation as listed in the document checklist must be submitted and deemed acceptable. In the MHP application, the tab named Local and Environmental Verification must be completed and executed by the local jurisdiction or governing body. Points are awarded based on your current approval status as identified on the form. Please ensure the authorizing representative marks the option that most accurately reflects your project, as you could potentially be awarded as many as 3 points as shown on this slide. The sixth scoring category is adaptive reuse, infill, and in proximity to amenities, with a potential maximum points of 15. Infill development, including adaptive reuse of vacant and underutilized commercial or industrial building located in a developed area served with public infrastructure. In the MHP application, you may select the option that is applicable to your site. Please be sure to include aerial photos of the proposed project site and a narrative for adaptive reuse. Applicant must submit an amenities list and a project area map. As shown in this example, the amenities list must include a name of the service amenity, address, distance from the project, and the TCAC points. You must identify that you have earned at least the maximum TCAC points scored to receive full points for this category. Here is an example of the project area map, illustrating the amenities and distance from the project. If any of the required information is missing from the amenities list map, this may result in a loss of points. We are aware that TCAC has changed the sustainable building method from a scoring category to a threshold requirement. As stated previously, MHP Round 4 is still subject to the June 2019 MHP guidelines, which has sustainable building methods as a scoring opportunity. MHP does not verify with TCAC the points that are obtained in this area. To be awarded 5 points, you will need to complete the narrative block within the application describing how you achieved minimum construction standards to meet TCAC threshold requirements. Additionally, you would need to submit the required documentation per the application document checklist. Bonus point. The bonus point is offered as an incentive to fully formed borrower entities. Applicants which have fully formed the borrower entity, including the general partner entities, such as managing general partner and administrative general partner, must submit complete borrower organizational documents as specified in the document checklist within the MHP application. Now, we want to emphasize that the bonus point is offered for fully formed entities. For-profit sponsors which do not include the necessary nonprofit partners will not be eligible for this bonus point. Applications that include to-be-formed entities or indicate an intent to change the borrower organizational structure at a future date will also not be eligible for this bonus point. And finally, the tiebreaker. In an event of a tie, the department shall rank applications based on the lowest weighted average affordability of restricted units of 60% AMI and below. This ranking is based on a formula. Please see the application and guidelines for further information. Thank you. And now Shirlane Hunt will go over the feasibility phase.
Thank you, Kenneth. Good morning. My name is Shirlane Hunt. I'll be guiding you through feasibility, the third and final section of the application review. When reviewing the development budget, verify the following. Contractor overhead and profit cannot exceed 14% of this cost of site work and structures, excluding builder's general liability assurance. Hard cost contingencies should be a minimum of 5% for new construction projects and a minimum of 10% for acquisition rehabilitation projects. If the amount provided is greater or less than the minimum requirement, a letter of explanation is required and comments must be provided. There are costs that may be included in other line items, or have multiple costs included in a single line item. We ask that you separate each cost. If for some reason the amount cannot be separated, it should be explained in the comment section. Some examples of these costs include prevailing wages, accounting, and miscellaneous items. The department will verify that these items do not include any ineligible uses of funds. Anytime an other cost is added, remove specify in the parentheses and identify the cost. Additionally, if there are multiple costs included in a single line item, please separate the amounts in the comment section located at the bottom of the development budget and sources and uses. An operating reserve is required to cover operating shortfalls resulting from department-approved operating expenses exceeding operating income beyond the rent-up period. Operating reserves are calculated from replacement reserves, non-contingent debt service, and projected operating expenses, excluding the cost of an on-site supportive service coordination. For tax credit projects, the department requires 3 months reserves, and non-tax credit projects require 4 months reserves. If the development budget includes a reserve that exceeds the amount required by the department, the reason for the excess amount must be explained in the comment section as shown here. Transition reserves are required when a development utilizes project-based rental assistance. In the event the rental assistant contract is terminated, MHP requires the reserve must be sufficient to prevent rent increases for 1 year after the rental assistance ends. If the project includes other department funds, the transition reserve will be underwritten to the most restrictive program. For example, No Place Like Home requires 2 years of sufficient reserves after the rental assistance ends. For more information, see the MHP Guidelines section 7312 F2 for this requirement. When determining the total development cost, please make sure the total amount in the budget matches the total amount of the permanent funding sources. The department will lower the amount of the requested MHP funds if the funding sources exceeds the development cost. There is a high cost verification calculator as part of the application. If the high cost verification exceeds 160%, an explanation is required and may result in disqualification. The department will review the operating budget for the following, but not limited to, the employee information section, bookkeeping, accounting services, 0.42% annual debt service, mandatory debt service for each HCD loan, annual bond issuer fee, and mandatory debt service. In previous rounds, applications were submitted without completing the following: number of employees, full-time equivalency, payroll taxes, workers' compensation, and employee benefits. I want to point these out as they are the most common items missed in the application. Please make sure payroll taxes, workers' compensation, and employee benefits are listed separately. For the employee unit section, be sure to include the job title, unit type, and square footage. Please be sure to complete the Supportive Services Cost Calculator tab in the application. The amount listed in the operating budget as total supportive services costs should be equal or less than the maximum amount as shown here on the service calculator. For projects with supportive housing and special needs populations, we wanted to provide clarification regarding the service plan budget and the operating budget. If the service plan budget includes costs paid from project operations, as shown here, under income source, then this amount should be in the supportive services cost line items in the operating budget, as shown in the second screenshot. The amounts in both budgets must match. Remember, remove the specify in the parentheses and identify the other supportive services costs. For other types of operating reserve, include documentation or a letter of explanation which includes the following: the purpose of the reserve, the source and the amount of funding, and the terms for disbursement, including the first year disbursement amount. Examples of other type of operating reserves include but are not limited to capitalized operating subsidy reserve, capitalized operating deficit reserve, and local operating subsidy program. Replacement reserves cover the costs of repairing or replacing failed or damaged capital items and to cover extraordinary maintenance expenses as approved by the department. For new construction, it is a lesser of 0.6% of the estimated construction costs, which excludes construction contingency, general contractor profit, overhead, and general requirements, or $500 per unit. For rehabilitation, it's initially $500 per unit and is subject to change at permanent loan closing. Finance expenses should include mandatory debt. Mandatory debts include amortized loans. As a reminder, balloon payments are not allowed on senior debt, except where the department's regulatory agreement is recorded in a senior position to the debt with the balloon payment. Balloon payments are allowed on junior debt during the term of the program loan only when the department determines that the balloon payment will not jeopardize project feasibility. Mandatory debts also include the MHP 0.42% annual debt service and the bond issuer fee. These amounts must be included to the finance expense section of the operating budget. Remember to include the annual debt service for any additional HCD loans separately. Asset management, partnership management, and similar fees must not exceed the amount allowed. For the current year of 2021, the amount allowed is $35,631. For projects with proposed rents, please select the proposed rent drop-down as illustrated here on the cash flow analysis. The application will be underwritten by the department using restricted rents, and the regulatory agreement will reflect proposed rents. The project will need to be feasible under both proposed and restricted rents. The project must demonstrate a positive cash flow of 15 years utilizing assumptions of an annual 2.5% increase in gross income and 3.5% increase in operating expenses. The first year debt service coverage ratio should not be less than 1.1 or greater than 1.2. Residual receipts and sponsored distributions are paid 50-50. The department may share with other public entity lender residual receipts on a pro rata basis. Keep in mind, residual receipt payments are not allowed on land donations or ground leases. Please note, private loans are paid from the sponsor's distributions. That concludes this section on feasibility. We will now be moving on to Simon, who will be presenting a section on application highlights and application submittal.
Thank you, Charlene. Hello, my name is Simon Tavalero. I will be going over some highlights of the MHP application for round 4. It is very important that you click the Enable Editing and/or Enable Content buttons before you begin your data input. You will not have full functionality if you do not. Make sure all submissions are completed on non-Apple products. Excel completed on a Mac is not compatible with our systems. You should not copy and paste from previous applications. In order for the application to be sufficient for us to perform our review, please submit all required documentation as specified in the document checklist. It is our recommendation to complete each tab in order as some information carries over from one section to the next. If you start from the beginning and complete each tab in order, you will minimize error messages and missing data. There are sections where some information flows backwards. Don't worry about information that has not yet fed in until you complete the entire application. Once your application is complete, if any of these cells have not populated, try saving, and if that does not fix the issue, you can reach out to app support. In the Project Overview tab, be sure to pay attention to the red shaded cells. The red signifies either the need for additional documentation, a critical threshold item has not been met, or that a letter of explanation needs to be provided with your application. Be sure to complete the section for disclosing any other HCD program funds you have been awarded, plan to apply, or have applied for. If already awarded, provide the awarded date and a copy of the award letter in your file. If you are in the process of applying or already submitted your application, enter the expected award date. If you have applied for department funds in the past, then you are aware that the yellow cells are to be completed by the sponsor with the requested information. As you see, some of these cells are no longer yellow, which means the information will be feeding in from other areas of the application. Also, in the Project Overview tab is the very important project type selection. If these checkboxes are not showing on your application, be sure your content and editing are enabled. Once you select a project type, the appropriate additional tabs will open based on your selection. You may qualify for multiple project types, so be sure to select all project types that apply to the types of units in your project. The supportive services plan is required if your project has either supportive housing or special needs units. As Grace mentioned earlier in this presentation, you must qualify for a minimum of one project type to be considered an eligible project. The unit size chart must be completed entirely because this information flows over to the Max Loan and Unit Mix tab, which calculates the square footage for shared cost. If this section is not completed, then your max loan amount will be 0. This is a screenshot of the unit mix portion of this tab. It has been slightly updated for round 4. Column L, Other HCD SH Assisted, is a new column that should be completed if any of the other HCD units are supportive housing. The calculation at the bottom right of this example will be green if you have met the bedroom size requirements for large family. So let's finish looking at the rest of this tab and how all this information flows in. Items auto-calculate based on information you have already entered in the application. Lines have been broken out and give you references in the red text as to where the information is coming from, so there is transparency on how we are calculating your loan amount. Please direct your attention to the orange arrow, which is pointing to the bedroom size row. This information is feeding from the unit size chart that was completed earlier in the Project Overview tab of the application. If the shared cost is not calculating, check that your unit mix is completed and verify you have completed the unit size chart in the Project Overview tab. Please note that for shared cost, the manager's unit is considered a restricted unit for the square footage calculation. The supportive services plan is required if you have a project that has either supportive housing or special needs units. There have been changes to the supportive services plan. Be sure you are reading each section carefully. In the target population box, complete the drop-down with the target population or populations of your project. Enter the total overall units and the MHP assisted units. For projects with supportive housing or special needs populations, it is a requirement to complete both a supportive services plan and a supportive services verification form. To avoid an incomplete application, it is imperative you select the special needs and/or supportive housing checkboxes on the project overview tab to open the required tabs to obtain and complete these documents. The supportive services verification form must contain a signature from the appropriate agency certifying a copy of the project's supportive services plan has been submitted and reviewed. If you have any technical issues with the application, please complete the Application Support tab with as much information as you can. Email your unlocked application to appsupport@hcd.ca.gov and the MHP inbox at mhp@hcd.ca.gov. I'll be wrapping up the presentation with a section on the application submission and resources. All application and supporting documentation are due Monday, September 20th, 2021 by 5 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. Your application must be submitted through the FAST system. The complete application should be uploaded and submitted by this due date. There are no exceptions. Applications will not be accepted after that date and time. Wet signatures are no longer required as part of the application submittal process. Please be aware the FAST online support and help desk closes at 5 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. Here is a link to the FAST webpage. Furthermore, the FAST link can be accessed through the MHP website. You will need to set up a profile with FAST prior to uploading the application and supporting documentation. There is also a FAST application manual on the MHP website. This is a highly competitive process. Applications must meet all eligibility requirements upon submission. You will not be able to add items to the application after the due date of Monday, September 20th, so please double check for completeness before submitting. Remember, no late applications will be accepted under any circumstances. It is crucial that your application is organized properly, as it will be evaluated based solely upon the materials contained within the application to determine completeness and compliance. As a reminder, you are waiving any claim of confidentiality and consenting to the disclosure of all material upon request. It is important to note that the information included in your application becomes a public record, which is available for for review by the public. Please only provide information specifically requested within the application. This concludes the section on application submittal. The following few slides provide links to resource tools that may assist you further. You may sign up for email updates on the HCD website. This is a link to the HCD website at www.hcd.ca.gov. Click the email sign up button located on the bottom right corner of the site and enter your email address. Here are the links for social media. And here are links to the MHP website where the first Q&A from round 4 can be viewed, the 2021 TCAC regulations, methodology for determining rural status, TCAC HCD opportunity area maps, and California government codes. MHP draft guidelines are posted on the MHP website. These guidelines, once finalized, will be the base for AB 434. As Hector mentioned earlier, for the round 4 NOFA, we will continue to use the June 19th, 2019 final guidelines. Please do not confuse them. If you have questions or comments on AB 434, use the Super NOFA mailbox listed here. Additional questions may be sent to the MHP mailbox referenced on this slide. We've given you a ton of information today. And as a reminder, the first Q&A from the round 4 workshop can be viewed on the MHP website. Thank you again for attending our presentation of the round 4 NOFA.
And again, this is Hector Leyva, one of the MHP program managers, on behalf of our branch chiefs, Craig Morrow and Laura Bateman, and my peer, Lynn Jones, the MHP teams who have presented today. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing your applications in this upcoming round. Have a great rest of your day.
Lynn Jones sneak